This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, welcome to Behind the Headlines. I'm Maura, an associate of the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Very pleased today to have Jere Strittmatter as my co-host. Great to see you. Well, thank you for pinch hitting for Charlie Greenwald, who is on assignment right now. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm looking forward to it, learning more. Thanks.
Well, we are really fortunate to have with us Mr. Dave Sanko, who is the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors. You're with us all the time. We love having you.
Love being here. Thanks for the invite.
So this is your first appearance in the new year. Tell us what PSATS is worried about or working on in this new year.
Well, I think as we go towards the new year, first we're coming off a municipal election year, so there's a lot of newly elected officials out there.
They're all being sworn in.
All were sworn in a couple weeks ago.
Good.
And are hitting the ground running, and we've got some special training for them to help them understand, so they don't have to make mistakes that everybody's already learned from. We'll share best practices, both in some boot camp training, but also our annual conference. So our job is to help them do their job better, to help them serve their residents efficiently and affordably, and be conscious to employing common sense and being sensitive to limited tax dollars.
Well, that's going to keep you busy.
I will.
Yeah, we're talking about limited tax dollars, and when you were our acting governor, in the past, that as soon as the last budget was finished, the new budget started. And so now they've had 6 months plus in order to do that. What have you thought about, the process these last 6 months of getting ready for the governor's budget address?
Well, I think our communities, our townships run on their fiscal year is on a calendar year. So they've all just finished their budgets, balanced, and have adopted a new budget for 2020. The state will go through their process. Their revenues, I think, we're running ahead, last I heard. But as we get towards the budget season, we'll be looking for how making sure the local governments aren't being disadvantaged or taken advantage of, or just become the new vehicle for providing services that the state doesn't want to pay for.
Right, that's been going on for a long time too. Just to follow up on that, with the state police issue and with local municipalities and their police force, and who pays for those things, and what's accurate and what should be done. What do you think is going to happen? You're talking about with limited tax dollars.
Sure.
What happens?
Sure. Well, I think back in the mid '40s, the voters approved a referendum to allow for motor license funds, for some of that to be used for the highway patrol. And there's a legitimate reason for that, but there's also a reasonable number that ought to be at. And I think over the course of the last 20 or so years, folks in Harrisburg saw that motor license fund as a cash cow, and started diverting those dollars to pay for the state police more and more and more and more, to the tune of $800 million. That's a lot of money. I mean, it's a lion's share of the department's budget, and quite frankly, it's not fair to anyone. I mean, the road dollars ought not be diverted, but it's also not fair to have all that funded by the state police budget, funded with the motor license fund. There aren't any more troopers today than there were 15 years ago. In fact, we're struggling to keep enough troopers because of the retirement cycles. So as we go through and take a look moving down the road, I mean, the inordinate costs for the state police are really a result of some of the pension costs that are out there, and it has nothing to do with public safety. And I think the legislature has to, and the governor have to take a hard look into the mirror and figure out if they want to help the state police survive and thrive within the resources they have.
Do you think there will be any movement on reducing the amount of money being diverted this year? I
think the legislature has set up a process to step that down. So I think that diversion will continue to reduce. I don't think there's any question that the Commonwealth ought to be. Public safety is one of the primary functions of state government. So the Commonwealth ought to be stepping up and paying for that out of the general fund. They often say, well, those local communities that don't have a local police department, they should pay for the state police. Well, my gosh, there are local communities that do have a local police department, and they use the state police just as much. So I think we need to kind of reframe the discussion and recognize that the state police is the foundation of law enforcement all across the Commonwealth, and that everybody gets state police service, everybody pays for state police services through their income taxes. And if you're in a community that you choose to want to have more law enforcement, you can put on a local police department, and you can pay for that and put those additional services in place, and they'll enforce ordinances, because right now the state police doesn't enforce local ordinances. The state police in rural areas is the only law enforcement mechanism that's out there, and sometimes there is, and residents are okay with that, because there's either not a lot of crime or they're okay with the response times or what have you. So it's not really fair to make them pay, particularly when you have, just as an aside, the largest municipal police department in the Commonwealth, the city of Philadelphia, has 5,500 police officers.
Wow.
And that's fine, and they do a great job. But the city of Philadelphia also had over almost 35,000 state police dispatches in their communities to help out, and they wouldn't have to pay for anything. And I'm not sure anybody thinks that's a fair idea either.
Yeah. Oh.
And you have a wonderful perspective too when you're talking about all the different counties and the different parts of the state, because if Pennsylvania was in Europe, it would be 14 different countries, and that there's a lot of misunderstanding. But you representing all the local officials across the entire state, get to see that. And so there'll be a budget process going on now, but there needs to be other legislative changes that make things better for everyone. What do you see some of those being, and what would you like to see that would help everyone in the Commonwealth, but especially our local officials, be able to do their jobs better that you were talking about?
Well, I think as we look at unfunded mandates, reducing some of those, but there's some big issues that are on the plate that for the legislature this year. The providing broadband, high-speed internet broadband across Pennsylvania, regardless of the area you come from.
Which I think a lot of us just take for granted. But a lot of the rural areas.
We do. There are almost 1 million people who don't have anything. And if you look at the most recent survey that was done by Penn State, 11 million of the 12 million people don't have adequate speed. So we do take it for granted, and it's going to have a long-term effect on economic development, on the education for kids looking forward, for health care, for all kinds of things, and we need to have that infrastructure in place. So I think they're going to have to take a look at broadband deployment across the Commonwealth. I think they're also going to have to take a look at how we fund fire and emergency services. We've lost over the last 30 years. We used to have 300,000 first responders. Now that's less than 50,000. Volunteers are down, and the legislature is hopefully going to work on ways to try and incentivize those volunteers, because frankly, if they don't, and volunteer fire services go away, the alternative is a paid career fire service, and the state fire commissioner says that will cost between $8 and $10 billion with a B dollars to have paid fire services all across Pennsylvania. That might be nice, but who's going to pay that bill? That's a lot of local property taxes that nobody can afford. So there's a huge incentive to try and hopefully move towards fire services, and transportation funding, I think, is another big thing that they have to have some discussions about moving forward, and making sure that we have an adequate transportation network all across Pennsylvania, both roads and bridges, but also air and rail and bus and a whole system.
Do you think they're willing to tackle the transportation? Is always a big issue, just statewide, but on the local level, it's really critical that the funding be available. Do you think the legislature is going to be tackling that, or willing to tackle that?
Well, I think they're going to have to. I mean, look, it's an election year, so it's always challenging as to what will get done and what won't get done. But if you look at the transportation network in Pennsylvania and realize that there are close to 117,000 miles of roads, And the state is only responsible for about 44,000 miles of that. So the lion's share of the roads and bridges across Pennsylvania are maintained by local governments, by townships and boroughs and communities, small communities, and maintained with property taxes, because there's not a lot of state dollars that have gone into that, because the state dollars go into the interstates, and the state dollars go into the cities for mass transit, for buses and trains, and the state dollars go to ports and airports and rail sidings and rail terminals. So I mean, the lion's share of most of the roads that most Pennsylvanians drive on are local roads.
Well, all politics is local, right?
All politics is local.
Maybe it will get some attention.
Yeah.
And then also the problem is that it was all done by gas, or gas consumption. Well, a lot of the roads are being destroyed by trucks that don't use gas.
Sure.
And so there needs to be a whole funding system that way. But on to another subject, though, that affects everybody, because everyone's so litigious across the Commonwealth now. Everybody wants to sue for this or sue for that, or I want to know this and I want to know that. And it seems like our military secrets and intelligence secrets are being given away, leaked away, down in Washington. What are we doing in the Commonwealth with the right to know law? And what kind of changes do you think need to be done to that, so people can understand what you're really entitled to and what you should pay for that, and how much time it takes away from local officials to fund these things that citizens feel they have a right to? What do you think is the right balance?
Well, I think that our members are insistent that the public be afforded the option of knowing what's going on and having that right to know. And we provide that. And that's frankly one of the reasons that local government works best, because residents can come and sit in your township meeting. They can't necessarily hike to the county seat. They can't always make it to the Harrisburg State Capitol or to Washington. Local government works because it's accessible. And the right to know law was a great idea 10 years ago. But it's still a good idea, but it's in need of some fixes. Right now there's a huge amount of local tax dollars that are being spent to fulfill commercial requests. So that, they did a survey that over a quarter, 1 in 4 requests come from out of state. And of that, almost 75% of those are commercial requests. So you have private businesses making requests of local governments, perhaps a pool company in Florida.
Yeah, for private information.
Looking for that information so they can sell products. And one of the things that we've advocated for is that if it's for a commercial request, that the communities ought not have to shoulder that at taxpayers' expense, and that the local community ought to be able to charge a little bit more for commercial requests, and be able to recover some of the costs, some of the staff time costs, because it's not fair to any Pennsylvania taxpayer that their local municipal employees are doing research for these out-of-state businesses to help them make money.
In our last 5 seconds, dates of your upcoming conference?
May 2nd through 6th.
Okay, for Township Supervisors.
Township Supervisors will be in Hershey.
And your URL where people can learn more about you?
Is www.psats.org, psats.org.
Thank you so much for being here today,
Thanks.
Dave. Yeah. Great to have you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with a new segment of Behind the Headlines.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors, the largest, most influential municipal association in the Commonwealth. Since 1921, PSATS has been preserving and strengthening township government and securing greater visibility and involvement for townships in the state and federal political arenas. Covering 95% of Pennsylvania's land mass, townships represent 5.5 million residents, more than any other type of political subdivision in Pennsylvania. Behind the Headlines is also brought to you by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, helping hospitals provide healing, health, and hope to communities across the state. And by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. The Pennsylvania Chamber serves as the frontline advocate for business on Pennsylvania's Capitol Hill by influencing the legislative, regulatory, and judicial branches of state government. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.
Welcome back. On this segment, Jere and I are going to talk about transportation funding, transportation in general.
With the expert.
With an expert. We have one of the renowned experts on transportation issues in Pennsylvania, Mr. Bob Latham. Welcome.
Good to be here, Maura.
Bob is the Executive Vice President of the Associated PA Constructors.
That's correct.
So nice to have you back.
Thank you. Good to be here.
A lot of change going on in Pennsylvania. We have a new Secretary of Transportation that has been nominated, Yasmin Gramian. Can you tell us a little bit about her?
Sure. First of all, I think we want to acknowledge the good work that Secretary Leslie Richards has done in her career as PennDOT Secretary over the past 5 years. She's moved on to become General Manager of the Southeastern Pennsylvania Transit Authority, SEPTA. And Leslie was groundbreaking in a number of areas and very supportive of transportation funding and transportation issues, and very important issues like diversity and inclusion in the transportation arena. Leslie was a leader there, and we look forward to continuing to work with her in her new role at SEPTA. Yasmin Gramian is no stranger to our industry or to transportation. She has been in the industry in major roles, particularly in the Philadelphia area, for a number of years. Yasmin was an engineer with 2 major engineering firms. She managed several projects in the Philadelphia region, and she comes to PennDOT with a world worth of experience. And we're looking forward to her leadership there. I've had an opportunity to speak with her personally, and I know that she's really focused on the personnel at PennDOT, which is very important. A lot of great people working at the department, and making sure that they have the resources that they need. I know she's going to be focused on that, as well as funding for transportation, which are some issues we're all going to be facing.
Well, following up on that,
Sure.
about the personnel, it is wonderful to have her take over as secretary, because someone from Pennsylvania, because Pennsylvania is unique in many, many ways, but
Right.
especially when it's come to the last years of what's happened with the personnel within all state government, but especially the Department of Transportation and the reliance on other people, with studies and all this other stuff, and we're really light on the personnel side. Can you, go into a little bit more depth on that and what you'd like to see?
Well, it's a little bit difficult, but I think one of the things we'd like to see, and I think that she might be working on, is what are the pay and the benefits. I know that this was started by Secretary Barry Shoke way back in the Corbett administration, and they've been working on this in a big way. Workforce development is a problem in our industry, whether it be in the private sector or whether it be in the public sector. We're facing this. Agencies are facing this. Engineering, engineering students are tending to graduate towards more technical careers as opposed to civil engineering, and so finding good people is a difficult thing.
And Yasmin is no stranger to APC. In addition to your having the ability to talk to her, she's been involved with committee work with APC.
Yeah, we have a committee that looks at bridge specifications and quality, bridge quality. Our organization, just for your viewers, we represent companies that build roads and bridges in Pennsylvania. They're private contractors who are the experts, and we work very closely with the Department of Transportation in making sure that we have the highest quality product that we can for the Commonwealth and for the tax-paying citizens. And Yasmin was a big member of that bridge committee and looking at some of the technical specifications. It's very complicated to build a bridge, as you might imagine.
Yes.
And it's amazing to me sometimes some of the things that we do. The one that comes to mind now is this bridge, the Central Susquehanna Valley Thruway. The bridge is so high now, we're having to deal with wind shear on automobiles, and how we deal with some of those aspects, soils and all kinds of things. So.
Yeah. Well, with funding, we know that as soon as one budget ends, the next budget starts, so there's been
Right.
6 months of preparation now going into the governor's budget address. And what do you see for this coming year with the funding, on budget items? The fact that we had the state police being used as a way for the General Assembly to balance the budget, by diverting dollars away from transportation, and everything is becoming more expensive, and everyone's so litigious. What do you see? And also being based on the gas tax, that's outdated now, with the oil franchise tax. So, inform our viewers, what your crystal ball has, coming up for the next 6 months during the
Wave
budget
your wand and
process.
fix everything. So there's a short-term and a long-term aspect of all this, Jere and Maura. I'm pleased to look at the General Assembly and look at the leadership that we have there, and the attention to this issue from both sides of the Capitol building. Let's start with the Senate to begin with. And again, looking at some of the short-term issues with state police funding and the fiscal cliff that we keep talking about with the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission tolls that have to go up every year in order to support
2044.
public transit. So on the Senate side, Senator Kim Ward, chairwoman of the House or the Senate Transportation Committee, introduced and the Senate passed legislation that would address the turnpike toll/transit issue. Senator Joe Pittman has introduced legislation that would also ease back some of the burden coming out of the Pennsylvania Highway Fund, or what we call the Motor License Fund, to pay for the state police. So that bill is already moving. Moving over to the other side of the Capitol building, we see Representative Martina White from Philadelphia, who chaired a Republican task force, and their recommendations looking at some things on efficiency and others that we support. But in addition, their recommendation is let's finish that job that those two senators have started once and for all. So we can see movement on the House Republican side as well, and not to forget Governor Wolf. Governor Wolf has been an advocate for fairness in terms of state police coverage, and some of the municipalities that are not paying for their police coverage and getting state police coverage for free. So he's been an advocate for that as well. So that's confluence of support.
It's all good.
Is all very very positive. Having said that, none of that solves, the future outlook, and really, when it gets right down to it, we are funding infrastructure, funding our transportation program by taxing the consumption of fossil fuels. And we have an energy policy in the country that says we're going to reduce consumption of fossil fuels. That doesn't square. So as we move into the future, we're going to have to get away from a consumption-based tax in order, to pay for roads. And look at other things, and that's something that another organization that we're involved with, the Keystone Transportation Funding Coalition, is looking at presenting, more of a long-term outlook. So your original question was, what's the budget look like for this year? I think the budget discussions will be very positive for transportation and infrastructure, but not on a grand scale. That'll be helpful. It maybe ease back some of the and address some of these short-term issues, but on a long-term scale, we still have much work to do.
Well, you mentioned the Keystone Transportation Funding Coalition. So tell us a little bit about what that coalition is and some of the other issues they're working on.
Sure. The coalition really is a multimodal, which transportation is. When you look at Pennsylvania, maybe you think of highways because we got a lot of roads. We have 40,000 miles of state road, only more than New York, New Jersey, and New England combined. But we also have we have two major cities. We have public transit in all 67 counties. And we have three major ports, water ports, which we don't really think about: Philadelphia, Erie, and then the inland ports, the river system of locks and dams in Pittsburgh. And all this is, air. And then, in addition to those we have an extensive network of bicycle and rail and pedestrian facilities as well. So it all kind of comes together. The Keystone Coalition is represented by all those groups, people that are interested in all those facets and kind of bringing the whole thing together. We were a major grassroots support organization when the most recent transportation bill passed in 2013, and we're continuing to look into the future as well. And that organization is now sort of in the absence of a vision going forward. We're in the process of creating such a vision to present to our political leaders and suggest that they look at some of these solutions, particularly from a short term. We just talked about some of the short term ideas, and then more from a long-term standpoint. How do we fund things as we go forward?
Yeah, that's smart, and hopefully the other states will learn that too,
Yeah.
as our legislative leaders and governors have worked together on transportation issues. Hopefully in the other states they will, which will lead into, though, if they would, then it would be better than with the federal funding. Then how do you see that, what's going to happen at the federal level in our last 2 minutes?
I had a chance to talk to the House Ways and Means Chair, Chairman Dean from Boston recently, and he said to me, once this impeachment business is over with, and I think everybody viewing can read into that what you will, we need to look at issues that actually impact people's lives. And he said transportation and infrastructure is something that the President wants, and we want as well. So I'm optimistic that we may see some action at the congressional level. And what they're looking at are ideas that are not gas tax related, not fuel consumption related. Some related to e-commerce, and maybe some fees related to e-commerce. We look at the distribution industry here in central Pennsylvania, for example. It's explosive, as is the number of vehicles that are put on the road as a result of that. So looking at maybe that as a way to fund transportation is something that Congress will be doing.
Well, we're going to have you back to find out
Sure.
what the updates are on several of these, especially the Keystone Transportation Funding Coalition, if they're working on their plan for the future.
Sure, as we get closer to a product there, we'll be happy to come back and talk about it.
Thank you very much for being with us
Sure,
today.
my pleasure.
Join us next time on Behind the Headlines.